everyone! Today we are going to be talking about a highly questionable video by a young Earth creationist named Matt Powell, which showed up on my YouTube For You page a few weeks ago, and which I immediately realised I had to respond to as a geologist. Now, based on some of Matt Powell's other outputs, we can expect some interesting arguments in this video, and I will almost certainly be responding to him in the future. But this video is called Christian Destroys the Noah's Flood is a Myth argument, and that's going to be a pretty hard thing to destroy since there is literally no geological evidence or biogeographical evidence for a worldwide flood, and plenty against the concept of one. There's also no evidence for a genetic bottlenecking of every species on Earth to only 2 individuals, which supposedly happened during the time humans have been around. Heck, the sheer lack of evidence for a flood and mountain of evidence against one is why I no longer believe there was a big global flood. But dear old Matt claims that he can provide evidence that the flood was real. So let's analyze his evidence and see if it stacks up to scrutiny.
In this video, I'm going to give you 10 reasons why Noah's flood is a fact. Number 1 is because you find sea life on every single mountain.
Yes, that's because of plate tectonics and the uplift of sediment over time.
There are entire whales that we find perfectly preserved on top of mountains. We also find gigantic oysters, some as big as cars, on the Andes Mountains. How did they get there?
And considering that we don't have any car-sized oysters today, these would have to be extinct oysters from an extinct ecosystem that existed millions of years ago. And they would have to have been cemented on the ground and grown for long enough to reach these immense sizes. Not something that realistically is likely to happen over only 40 days.
These oysters are often sealed shut, and they were not even able to open when they died, as oysters and clams normally do.
Could they have closed because the shell is just really damn heavy, given how big they apparently are? Also, if they were still closed because they were rapidly buried, that doesn't mean a big global flood. It could just be that they were rapidly buried by a landslip or a turbidity current before the animals died, so they didn't get a chance to open up. Heck, shells don't even stay open sometimes when you find them after they've died. Here are some shells that I found on a beach that were closed but clearly dead. So finding fossilized closed shells doesn't necessarily even mean rapid burial. But I'm going to pause my thought here and come back in a bit after I've had a chance to read up on the literature about these shells. Okay, so I just delved into this and discovered that there actually are no giant oysters in the Andes. None. What happened is that there are these giant rock concretions that cross-cut bedding planes in the Andes. A concretion is basically where fluid flowing through a sedimentary rock deposits harder minerals, usually around the nucleation point, and we can easily see that these are concretions in the rock. Because if you look at the striations running along these supposed shells, they're just straight lines, all going in the same direction. Actual bivalve shells have ridges or ribs extending out radially from the umbo, which is the oldest part of the shell, and they might have growth lines, which are the shape of the outer margins of the shell cross-cutting along those. But these just run straight through the supposed shell. They are bedding planes. This is a perfect example of pareidolia. But I want to reiterate that even if these shells, which are not actually shells, were real, they would still not be evidence for Noah's flood.
Would be polystrata fossils. Think about it, we find trees that are upside down in some cases that are penetrating multiple layers of the geologic column. Now, if these layers slowly accumulated over millions of years, why is it that you have a tree that connects many of these layers? That means that the layers are an identical age.
How could a rock layer possibly be identical in age to the thing underneath it. Like, the layer underneath it has to have already been deposited for new sediments to be deposited above them. I'm really not sure how polystrata fossils are evidence for anything beyond a fast sedimentation rate in the place where they are present. And fast sedimentation rates are to be expected in the kinds of environments where you get polystrata fossils. Matt claims that geologists act like sedimentary layers are always deposited over millions and millions of years is false. I'm a geologist and I can attest that that is very much not always the case, especially in floodplain areas, estuaries, lakes, and environments like that. Heck, one of the blue carbon studies I'm currently working on involves work on estuary deposits where we've got sediments about this thick being deposited in an estuary over the course of about 50 years. Like, this in no way implies that there was a great flood about 200 or 300 years ago in that estuary, only that estuaries sequester lots and lots of sedimentary load, as do other coastal wetland habitats. Estuaries, floodplains, and coastal swamps have fast sedimentation rates and are exactly where you get trees like these preserved in coal deposits. Dead trees can stay upright for decades, sometimes centuries, and in coal seam deposits, which used to be peaty coastal swamps, you'd expect rapid subsidence of this sediment and fast sediment accumulation around these already dead trees. An absolutely huge tree is going to take a long time to be buried in these environments and is going to have sediments forming around it. There's also the fact that we know from the rocks that coal seam trees grow in that there were other plants growing around them as they were being buried. These were not chaotically thrown together during a massive flood event, as the bedding planes should show you.
An identical age, because trees aren't just going to stand there for millions of years waiting to be fossilized as sediment layers are slowly forming around them. It tells us that these trees were placed there by a cataclysmic process and not by slow and gradual change in the Earth's crust.
Then why are the trees in your photos surrounded by neat sedimentary layers and not chaotic breccias or conglomerates that you might expect from a dramatic high-energy flood event?
My coal seams, some of them are actually over 100 feet thick. Now, coal is made up of vegetation and swamp material and plants and trees that get smashed together between sediments. That's how coal is formed. And so in order to get a seam that's over 100 feet thick, you would have to have a globally cataclysmic event to be able to create such coal seams.
Why? Like, you just said that coal seams, which are where most of these kinds of trees are deposited, are swamp forest deposits. Wouldn't a globally catastrophic event just destroy the swamp and rip up most of that sediment, making the coal seam thinner, or even eroding it entirely? Like, you just described how over millions and millions of years, a huge amount of peat could slowly build up in a swamp that could convert to coal. By the way, here are some really nice swamp forests that I've been to, which you could go check out if you're in New Zealand, and just for a little palate cleanser. This is a Rimu and Manuka dominated swamp forest in Haldane on the south coast of the South Island, and it's just inland of the salt marsh, and it has an absolutely waterlogged forest floor. It has an extremely diverse array of ferns, herbs, shrubs, and trees growing in it, and it is just unbelievably fascinating if, like me, you are a plant nerd. Another great swamp forest to check out is this Manuka one around Lake George, also in Southland. I mean, look how many sedge species are on that forest floor. It is mind-blowing. And here's an invasive crack willow dominated swamp forest. What I'm getting at is swamp forests are great, and I will not see their status as environments with rapid sedimentation rates insulted like this. Matt Powell, you did not even explain your argument.
Would be rock arches. Think about it. Rocks are actually breaking down. This mountain that's behind me is being broken down by gravity over time. Gravity is causing everything to erode flat. Could rock arches have been standing for millions and millions of years without crumbling down from gravity?
No, they form as a result of gradual erosion. Like, you can see them on beaches and see how they get bigger over time when you look at old paintings. No one on Earth is pretending that erosional structures are necessarily millions of years old. Hundreds maybe, thousands maybe, but what point are you even trying to make here? A cataclysmic flood over a short amount of time would carry huge blocks of sediment that would crash against each other chaotically, not cause smooth, erosive structures like these.
The answer is no. These rock arches were formed in the recent past by Noah's flood, by a globally cataclysmic event, and that's why they're still standing today, is because they were placed there in the recent past. They were formed in the recent history of the planet.
And no geologist would disagree that these are recent features. So why, Matt, are you pretending that they would? And again, you have failed to explain how a giant flood could produce these structures when modern-day flash flood events don't produce rock arches.
This would be hoodoos. Hoodoos are rock spires that often have very little debris at the bottom of them. Now, is it possible that these structures could be sitting there for millions of years and not have come crumbling down from gravity?
Okay, so hoodoos are rock spires that tend to conspicuously form in dry areas and can form in two ways, usually acting in tandem with one another. The first is a result of freeze-thaw processes over long periods of time. This is where water seeps into cracks in the rock during the day and then freezes at night. When the water freezes, it expands by around 10%, which forces the cracks open. And on a macro scale, this results in a broader ice wedging, which can slowly pry the rocks apart from one another. The second way that these form in tandem with the first is as a result of rainwater, because rainwater is slightly acidic due to CO2 in the atmosphere dissolving and forming carbonic acid in solution. As a result, rainwater, which will preferentially invade pre-existing cracks when it falls onto a rock, will slightly dissolve those cracks or those ice wedges and make them even wider, which over long periods of time results in these stacks forming that we call hoodoos. I've attached a fantastic article on how this works on Geology page.
Wouldn't these rocks have eventually broken down and become completely flat with the Earth's crust if millions of years of time were what had allowed them to be placed there?
Yes, but that's where plate tectonics comes in. The uplifting of rocks as a result of plate tectonics is why rocks aren't completely flat everywhere.
Let me tell you something. What placed these rock spires there, these hoodoos, was a globally cataclysmic event that happened in the recent past. Noah's flood is a fact of geology, and the reason that we know that is because of these things that we are now observing in science that you can test and verify to be.
You have provided no evidence for this at all.
My sixth piece of evidence would be mountains themselves. Many mountain ranges are made of bent rock. Now, according to Darwinists, the plates are moving 1 to 2 inches per year and it causes mountains to slowly get formed. But if that were true, how is it that you have mountains that are made up of bent rocks? You cannot bend hard rock. It will break. It will shatter. What it means is that these layers would have had to have all been pliable all at the same time.
Well, considering that folding is observed in all rock types, including igneous rocks, that definitely weren't made during your flood, that is obviously not true. Also, turbulent floodwaters don't bend rock units. But you know what does? Tectonic stress, especially when, say, plates are colliding and you have a lot of stress generating a lot of strain in those plates from the rocks moving in two separate directions towards one another. And like, most of that folding is happening when these rocks are miles below the surface. And when rocks are at depth, they are hotter thanks to the geothermal gradient, which makes them more pliable under stress. So No.
Number 7 would be sharks that are buried with dinosaurs in the center of the United States. How is it possible that a wave of water could hit the center of the United States to be able to bury hundreds of thousands of different animals with sea life, sharks, dinosaurs, and so on and so forth, all at dead center of the US? That means there would have been a globally catastrophic flood.
Matt, why are you talking about a wave of water? The middle of the United States was an inland sea called the Western Interior Seaway throughout much of the Cretaceous period. We have a long fossil record through it and evidence for different species and lineages of dinosaurs living on the west of the Western Interior Seaway to what were living on the east at the same times. We talked about this in my video on Appalachiosaurus and in my videos on Prehistoric Planet. Any dinosaurs we have that are in these rocks would have been animals living in the coastal environments or animals that washed out to sea. Scientists have studied the changes in ammonite species assemblage in this seaway over time, thanks to evolution and extinction, and have also done paleoceanographic studies looking at oxygen changes in the seaway over time. This is a vast series of marine deposits only in the middle of America.
How is it possible that a wave of water could hit the center of the United States to be...
None of these sediments make any sense to have been produced by a big wave.
Number 8, we find whales in the desert. How did they get there? How do you get whale fossils that are preserved? Because remember, a fossil has to be rapidly buried by sediment in order to be preserved. How do you get it in the Sahara Desert? The answer is that a globally catastrophic flood called Noah's Flood actually happened and placed whales in the Sahara Desert that we're now finding.
Well, that's because the Sahara Desert was not always a desert. The site that Matt is referring to is the mid to late Eocene Wadi al-Hatan sequence, which is made of a sequence of shallow marine sediments, including silts, limestones, and clays, all of which indicate that this was a low-energy environment, so not a big chaotic flood. See this paper, which I've linked in the description. And this fantastic monograph, which is on the sea cows that also lived in this habitat and grazed on the sea grasses which grew here. This was demonstrably not a flash flood deposit because you don't suddenly get sea grasses forming in a flash flood environment. Also, those whales that Matt talked about, they were not normal modern day whales. They were basilosaurids, specifically of the genera Basilosaurus and Dorodon. Basilosaurids were an ancient group of more primitive whales that, unlike modern whales, still had differentiated heterodont teeth, which are more like those of land mammals.
Number 9, fossils. Think about it. Fossils require rapid burial in order to be preserved.
Usually, yes. What's your point?
If you're finding things like fossilized ichthyosaurs giving birth, what that tells you is that it doesn't take 10,000 years to get a fossil, like Darwinists assume. It only takes a few moments in some cases.
What? I'm really confused by what point you're making. Like, how does the fact that this animal was giving birth say anything about how long it took to fossilize? Does Matt think that this animal somehow fossilized instantaneously to death? I genuinely don't understand what argument he's even trying to make here. Like, animals sometimes die in childbirth because it is a very physically stressful and traumatic experience to go through. And also, animals' bodies fill up with gas when they die. It's possible that gas buildup and bloating after this animal was buried resulted in the ejection of the baby long after it died. This has zero bearing on how long that fossilization took.
It only takes a few moments in some cases.
I'm sorry, a few moments? What? How? How did you come to that conclusion? He really does think that these animals were just alive 1 second and then somehow became fossilized to death with zero explanation for how or why that would happen.
That would be an awfully long birth if it actually took that long for that fossil to form. You find fossilized schools of fish that are all together. We find fossilized fish eating other fish. Does it take 10,000 plus years to have a meal?
This seems to imply that Matt thinks that these animals were fossilizing whilst they were still alive, and yet Matt has provided zero mechanisms for how that would happen. You are aware, Matt, that a turbidity current or a mudslide can catch a group of animals instantly, right? And that has no bearing on how long fossilization would have taken afterwards. And also, have you not considered that maybe this fish died because it was trying to eat something that was sadly too big for it? Fish choking to death is actually a really common way for fish to die, because they famously like to eat things that are too big for them. And again, this has no bearing on your weird instantaneous fossilization hypothesis, which itself also has zero bearing on the supposed global flood at all.
Number 10, we find cold rock that has been subducted into the hot molten mantle of the earth. And this, I would say, is probably the most powerful piece of evidence for Noah's flood. How is it that you have cold rock that's 10 miles thick that has been subducted into the molten mantle, where you have hot rock all around it? How is that possible if slow and gradual change 1 to 2 inches per year is pulling that rock down into the mantle?
Matt, in all seriousness, what on earth are you talking about? The mantle is not molten. It's ductile and flows very slowly, plastically, over thousands and thousands of years as a result of the heat from the Earth's core inducing convection. But it is a ductile solid. The asthenosphere is molten. But anyway, about that cold rock.
Into the mantle. What it shows us is that in the recent past, the crust of the earth was broken up and pieces of rock were going under one another and literally causing mountains to form.
Wait, hang on. So Matt does believe in plate tectonics and that the world is hotter at depth. So why did he just earlier say that rocks can't fold if he believes that rocks get hotter with depth and undergo pressure? Was Matt lying? I think he was. Are you aware that Matt lives with a giant inflatable banana that he calls Dr. Peel?
Earlier, but then we realized, since they're still cold, that this catastrophe must have happened in the recent past. So if you find cold rocks that are in the hot mantle of the Earth, and they're from the crust of the Earth, they had to have been rapidly subducted.
You are aware that these rocks are still hundreds of degrees C hot, right? And yeah, it realistically would take a long time for a many kilometers thick slab of rock to heat up relative to its surroundings as it subducts. Subducting slabs typically get 50 degrees cooler per kilometer the closer towards their center you get, as discussed in this paper, which I've linked in the description. So this is very well understood and in no way indicates a super rapid subduction like you're suggesting it needed to end your supposed flood.
And let me say this too. If something like that happened today, if you had a 10-mile thick piece of rock from the oceanic crust that was broken up and rapidly subducted, we would experience such a globally cataclysmic process here that we would have another global flood.
What? No! Like, how? What you get is more volcanism and a lot more water entering the crust, resulting in even more volcanism, but less water being available to produce the supposed flood. Again, check out that paper I just talked about.
These are just some facts that I wanted to share with you about why we know that Noah was a real person.
Wait, what? I thought you were supposed to be providing evidence that this flood happened, which you haven't. Even if you had, which you didn't, you failed to provide any evidence that Noah was a real person on top of that. By the way, apparently Matt Powell has a giant inflatable banana in his garden, which he calls Dr. Peel.
That Adam and Eve were real people and that you can trust the Bible and what God's Word has told us about these things such as geology in the book of Genesis. And I'd like to end with this thought. Noah was actually warning people, and he was telling everybody, guys, get on the boat. There's going to be a tremendous flood that's going to come to this world, and it's going to destroy the planet. It's going to wreak havoc on the earth. and people laughed at him and they mocked him. We're also warning people, just as Noah did, about a coming judgment.
Oh, the irony of you saying this kind of thing whilst you ignore the actual scientists who give these kinds of evidence-based warnings about the demonstrable fact of anthropogenic climate change.
And I believe that the flood of Noah is the story that authenticates the entire Bible.
You literally chose the worst story to do that with, Matt. If the flood of Noah was real, why do modern-day monotremes and most marsupials only live in Australasia and have long fossil records there? How are freshwater fish still alive? Or did Noah collect every single species of freshwater fish in a bunch of fish tanks? Did Noah go caving and collect all of the cave fish? How did Noah collect all of the parasites for every single species of animal? Did he infect every species that went onto the ark with every parasite that that species has? How did the lemurs know to swim back to Madagascar, and why did lemurs migrating from Mount Ararat to Madagascar leave no fossil record between Mount Ararat and there? Same question with, say, coatis in South America. You don't even bother trying to answer a single one of these questions.
What that shows us is that there must have been somebody that built an ark of some sort and protected all of the animal kinds on this seaworthy vessel. And what that tells us is as well is that God's word is true, that Genesis is actually a historical account of the past.
If Genesis is an accurate account of the past, then explain the entire field of biostratigraphy. I dare you, Matt. Well, that was an easy video to debunk. Somehow Matt Powell was even easier to debunk than Mud Fossil University, which is interesting. In any case, I've been Dr. Diana King. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, subscribe, ring the little bell icon. And if you want to support me, you can do so via this very important GoFundMe, via Ko-fi, or you can support the channel on Patreon. Speaking of which, huge shout out to our wonderful 4am tier patrons, Aries and Geneva, our amazing Dilophosaurus tier patron, Hours, and our ravishing Radiolarian tier patrons, Glenn Collins, Rowan Utting, and Jean and Eric Feenstra. Thank you very much for watching. Next time we're probably going to finish Main Mower Madness, unless this video bombs, in which case I'm going to try to come up with some kind of clickbaity debunk purely to get my views back on track. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day, or if it's nighttime, I hope you sleep well. Bye!